Hello everybody, and welcome to ABM Answered, the quickfire demand generation ABM video series, or at least that's what we aim for. I'm here with Emily, who is totally capable of introducing herself in a second. But to give a short overview of the series, Emily, in this case, will be given 7 questions to respond to, all about the current challenges of account-based marketing and demand generation at the moment. These questions have come from and been adapted based on the data that we've collected at Mixed Reality Rooms, where over 1,000 marketers have gone through and stated what their biggest headaches are at the moment with Demand Gen and ABM. Emily, I will hand it over to you to give an intro.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. I'm the Strategy and Business Director at Clarify, which means I sit across both our marketing practice to support against marketing strategy and program curation and implementation, and the business's growth function to lead on integrated sales and marketing conversations and proposal builds.
Right. So, Emily, problem 1 that came in was the different understandings of what ABM is within the organization. So my question to you would be, what do you do kind of as an organization when there are a really diverse understanding of what kind of ABM is, who makes the final decision, and how do you align kind of the teams?
This is a good one. I hear many opinions on what ABM is. I suppose as Clarify's setup and approach it's a little different to most. So our team, we're comprised by sales and marketing experts who jointly work on pipeline generation programs. So I think what helps for me when I'm dealing with new prospects is to start by painting a picture of our world of ABM and almost like a zoomed out view of sales and marketing strategy as we see it. So sometimes if that isn't the case, you can find yourself responding to a brief or an ask that, sort of maybe a component part of ABM, like a tactical asset or siloed top of funnel marketing activity, when in fact it just helps to take a step back and talk through the respective sales and marketing responsibilities and disciplines involved in making an ABM program successful. I don't think it matters who's doing it, be it the client in full or their agencies or a mix of both, just as long as your sales and marketing teams are unified in their approach. I think that is what the most important part of a good ABM strategy and what that looks like. It will be as effective as possible if both sales and marketing teams are aligned from the off. And I do think it's not one person that then makes that final decision. So I think it's really important to understand what good looks like for all parties involved. So that can be established at the start and maintained then throughout the entire life cycle of the investment.
Nice, fantastic. Do you touch bases every kind of week, every month, like a check-in with sales?
I mean, it really depends on the type of program. I mean, some programs are integrated, whereby we've got both Clarify sales and marketing teams working together, which means that it can just be something as simple as, just an open Teams channel whereby everybody's checking in daily on the responsibilities. Yes, we tend to have like weekly regroups and then obviously our weekly calls with the clients. But I think in terms of that alignment piece, it's really important to leverage the intelligence on both sides. Because when I joined Clarify, my background was marketing, but creative agency full stack, and we weren't part of a broader sales arm, which is sort of the difference of Clarify. So I had to understand how best to utilize the intelligence of my peers, and obviously coming together on programs, it's just so important to just have that constant open channel of communication so that you can respond to and plan as effectively as possible.
Awesome. Okay, solid answer. Problem 2 that came in was finding innovative ways to cut through the B2B noise while adhering to budget constraints. So the question, I guess, for me would be, what have you seen working recently from kind of an ABM perspective?
I suppose going to the problem statement of innovative ways, I think one of the most common things that we see as a business that people are facing is that innovation always needs to be seen as like a thing of progression, when in fact we are seeing a return to more traditional ways of authentic engagement like direct mail. But actually what I think is most important to note is that it's not necessarily the vessel or vessels or channels that we're leveraging to cut through the noise, but the weight of the message that sits behind it and the impact of its sentiment. So, for example, AI and live language tools. The most talked about thing right now to help sales and marketing teams to innovate. Work smarter, not harder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we can apply automation to help cut our time and our costs, but we never ever want to fall into the volume trap, is kind of what I call it, which really it then goes to affecting conversion of opportunity at the end of the day, and the quantity over quality play, which can be seen as an attachment to automation. That is a little bit of I wouldn't say a little bit, a big risk. So, for example, RMD, he sent me this thing on Teams the other day, and it was a video of a salesperson reaching out. So it was their face, their body, their voice, etc., and they were conveying whatever it was, message X, Y, and Z in their outreach. But at the end, they revealed it to be entirely curated by their AI platform, and I can see what they were trying to do, but the sentiment, it evaporated when, I suppose, almost that human truth and vulnerability was removed. So I suppose on the flip side, a good example of what I've seen working well recently is not so much to focus on automation, but to look at, sort of where there are obvious opportunities if budgets are really pressured. So, for example, there's no point for me as a marketing strategist to recommend a net new logo acquisition program with shiny new tools when, in fact, the business is overseeing account white space or growth potential, and marketing may well be under supporting sales to open opportunities within their existing client set. So I do think there's a bit of a fear culture right now of being left behind or judged, if you're not seen to be innovative or innovating, which can make organizations feel like they need to be doing something entirely different to make up for whatever challenge or deficit they're facing. But I think when, in fact, the immediate priority you could see as being by just simply adjusting what they're currently doing and just doing it with improvements.
And fantastic response, which kind of leads into the next problem, which is personalization at scale. So you mentioned AI, and I'm totally in agreement with you. I think people are starting to see beyond kind of all you need to hit. It's always going to be a numbers game, right? You're going to have quality really does help, but it's always going to be a numbers game. But how do you kind of balance that when AI can generate thousands of pieces of content or thousands of these things all in one go? I guess I don't want to overcomplicate it, but the problem that came in was personalization at scale. How do you approach this if you've kind of got a follow on?
Okay. So I think we're all savvy enough to know when we're the victim of mass comms with our names changed in the field. So I wouldn't spend I wouldn't spend my time ranting about that, because I think everybody knows the dangers as far as sort of marketing is concerned. But more specifically, maybe to account-based marketing, for me it involves so much more than personalization, which to me translates as relevance. But I think resonance is the most important ingredient when it comes to really meaningful outreach. And ultimately, we need to ask ourselves what the prospect truly cares about, to spark any hope of engagement while remaining sensitive to the fact that, for example, a CFO who we assume will be high control and low risk actually could be somebody that is more trailblazing than most, or potentially open to new ways of doing things. So while we can personalize our outreach by being a credible hypothesis, it's really, I think, what we do with the remainder of the engagement to really support that human-centric approach. And I fully appreciate I might not be the best person to ask for advice on this one, as I really don't focus, and Clarify doesn't focus on quantity as a business, but on resonance and the need state, sort of which we find is the most powerful approach to unlocking I suppose, high value enterprise deals, which are most likely to convert to revenue. So personalization at scale is never a tactic that I fold into my strategies, put it that way.
Well, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? In the end, it's what's going to bring in the revenue. I guess, yeah. If you find that focusing more on like the depth of the message and allowing it to resonate with the customer is better for the top line. I always get those mixed up. Top line, right? Not the bottom line. The top line of driving revenue. Then yeah, that answer's great.
And to add to that, if mass personalization is a thing, it's just a component part of what needs to be a much bigger strategy. So yes, while you can do it, in terms of the metrics that are going to sit behind it, they're just going to be engagements, interactions, click-throughs, depending on how you're measuring. But the true personalization comes at that account and stakeholder level when you are looking to nurture somebody through the sales cycle and the deal process, and making sure that you're going beyond just what somebody cares about as a result of a piece of research based on their job title.
A question that's just popped into my head, and I might edit this out afterwards. I don't know if it's a complicated. I'm probably going to sound like an idiot asking it more than like you don't have a response for it. But so on one of the last interviews that I did with a lady called Mariska, she mentioned that there's about 17 touch points now to convert. So everyone, I think, all marketers understand that the touch points are getting longer now, right? So the sales cycle is getting longer, which often requires more touch points. Do you find that by improving or focusing on just making that message resonate and like improving the weight of kind of like and personalization of every touch point, it shortens that cycle? So you don't have the industry average of 17 touch points, you've got maybe an average of 10 touch points. Is that something you track or not really?
Yeah, it is something that we track really quite carefully. So as part of our, I suppose, program wash up and analysis, we chart what we call our engagement barometers. So it essentially looks at, so if you've got a program that has 30 accounts that you've been furnished by your client, and it's a target account list of 30 that you're going out to and influencing as part of a 4 to 6 to 8 month program lifecycle, we tend to say that anything is at that sort of 6 month minimum for real engagement monitoring. But say for example, you've got 30 accounts. There are going to be so many different activities within each of those account sets. So what we do as a sales and marketing team on that is that we're in close comms with our SDR. They're in close comms with us in terms of like the type of messaging that they're putting out there, if that's the right approach, soundboarding ideas off us. And if we've got assets ready to deploy, then sometimes we can be deploying those assets a lot quicker based on the intelligence that we're gleaning from the SDR. And that this I talk about in a little bit more detail at a later stage. But essentially, we do find that the intelligence piece and having a more curated experience to the buyer can really shorten the process. And we actually ran a program recently whereby we had a pipeline forecast against it of about 3.5 million. So it was an important project for the client. And as a result of our integrated touch points, they were so much more involved because of the nature of this account set. We actually ended up at the end of a 4-month period with about 18 million in pipeline on their CRM. So
wow,
which is incredible. And it's such a great success story for us. But that program, it was run so differently to any other program that we'd run based on the nature of the accounts. So I really say that is a core dictation of anything that you are doing, is look at the nature of the accounts. Like, are these enterprise, sort of majors? Are they behemoths in the realms of engagement? Or is this something that is going to be a little bit more simple based on the setup and the structure and the nature of the targets and the pursuits within that respective account set? So I would just say it really depends on the nature of the accounts and the size of the prize. But ultimately, the touch points, yes, we're seeing exactly the same thing to what you mentioned earlier and what your peer mentioned about there being at least 17 to 20 different touch points and consideration milestones of any buyer journey. Yeah, it can be very complex.
Fantastic. I'm so glad we went down that rabbit hole, but I'm so conscious of time. So I'll move on swiftly, Emily. We're over halfway after this question. The next problem that came in was problem 4 of repurposing existing content for our key accounts. So do you experience this? Maybe you can share some light on kind of like your type of content lifecycle, or just kind of how you go about repurposing your content for different channels.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely experience this, and it forms a big part of our planning process when it comes to understanding our clients' asset portfolios and their collateral. You know, you can spend a lot of money investing in content, and if that is the case, then you want to try and make that content work, but just as long as it's a good fit for the type of activity that you're wanting to undertake. So I am a firm believer in just not suggesting content creation for the sake of it, but instead learning more about what the organization has and how it can be leveraged on an account-based or a stakeholder level. For example, if you've got recently commissioned a generic promotional video, say for a new solution, is this something that can be bookended with a more tailored message and closing sentiment as part of its introduction and close? So you can do things quite smartly, and you really don't have to overbake it if you do have an asset portfolio that is quite suitable. Obviously, key accounts, they hold exceptional value to organizations that are seeking to nurture and grow them. So really start by asking what your clients care about. You know, what's capturing their attention right now? What is their core focus? What do their strategic objectives do they look like over the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? And then focus on how your organization is primed to help support their progression. So it's not, I would say it's not just about repurposing content to speak to a target list of individuals within the account, but placing yourself firmly in their world to assess whether or not your message or your solution is going to speak to a particular challenge they're facing right now, or a challenge that they may need to prepare for based on their longer term goals and objectives.
Nice. And how do you capture that information? Is it a case of just kind of account reps conversations happening, or do you use any form of like tools to understand kind of like the sentiment of like the content that you've already put out has resonated with that audience?
Yeah, so it's something that we're working on right now at Clarify, and we're implementing a content feedback tool, which actually it takes our intelligence to, I suppose, the next level of understanding, because we can spend so much time as marketing people curating content that we feel is interesting and important, and with all of our research and understanding, know that it's going to land with the type of person that we're trying to reach. But actually, there isn't, or there hasn't been up until now, anything to help give us insight and feedback on whether or not that prospect finds it interesting. And I think in everything that we do, if you can find as many markers as possible without being too stalky or bombarding, to encourage somebody to feedback against what they have received or what they experience, I think is quite an important trend, and one that I think is going to surface quite quickly, because with just going back to AI and automation, you sometimes don't know whether or not you're at the receiving end of something that has been months in the planning, or just as part of like a quick dash spray and pray approach. And nobody wants to feel like that. And I think if we are able to leverage tools that help us to better understand what our audience feels, it gives them a chance to provide feedback. We know that surveys are very popular forms of capturing that, but then also giving us that further right to then engage in conversation and say, you know, we noticed that you found this particular topic interesting. Is there anything else that you want us to go into? Or if you curate a landing page for a particular prospect on behalf of a client and they feedback and say you've absolutely missed the mark, like I don't care about any of this stuff, you can then go back to the drawing board. I mean, God forbid, but you can then go back to the drawing board and go, okay, well, you know, what did we miss here? And for me, the holy grail would be to encourage and to get feedback on everything that we do. We know that that's not possible. You know, maybe if we get a 10% strike rate on feedback, even, you know, more intelligence then nothing for me is a good platform from which to build. So yeah, we're actively looking at tooling to help us become more accessible as marketers on behalf of our clients to the people that they are trying to reach out to. And because if you do give people that chance of feedback, more often than not, they're able to part with some really amazing nuggets that you can take into any future planning.
Awesome. Fantastic. Yeah, let's continue. Problem 5, knowing when to pivot. So I probably personally struggle with this as well. I'm kind of perhaps stubborn. I don't know. It's like, and there's the sunk fallacy cost of like, oh, you've invested all this much time into it. Just give it a bit more time. It just keeps going and going, but like nothing really happens sometimes. Do you have any indicators that you kind of swear by or abide by, or like how do you know when it's time to kind of pivot, drop, or like amend or change an ABM program?
Yeah, I think this challenge, I think it can be solved in a couple of ways. First is just planning well, and I know that sounds so obvious to say, but it can help to negate all sorts of scenarios whereby the message is, for example, being blamed as opposed to something else like the market that you're going into. So nobody wants to have to deviate and pivot from their original plan if something is working. So I'd say before anything is live, just ask yourself if the foundations of the campaign and what you're doing, like your total addressable market, subsequent research, account planning, profiling, sales and marketing messaging matrices, whatever that looks like, that is all aligned. And I'd say this is why it is so important to have unified sales and marketing teams from the off, so that you can, and I know that I mentioned it previously, but really leverage each other's intelligence. For example, we received a target account list from a client recently, and we assessed every account, and we do assess the accounts as part of our planning stage, just to ensure that selection is viable, because sometimes you can receive it and it can come from all sorts of places of rationale and opinions. So we always assess the target account list just to make sure. 90% of it was great, but then there was a remaining 10% just carried risk. So anything can fall into that. For example, gleaning a bit of budget intelligence if they're being frozen, or knowing that the organization are about to be acquired. So you could go into them 500 million times with a message, but they're not at the right time to buy. So we invited the client to provide subsequent accounts, which they did, and they were happy to, based on our recommendations. But then when we actually got going with the sales outreach, before we went into asset distribution, we established some new information, which meant that there were accounts that we initially enrolled that needed to be handled differently, and this meant that we didn't need to pivot our approach or messaging or the bulk of it, but actually we just really focused on the timings to ensure distribution happened at the more or the most opportune moment for the prospect that we were attempting to engage. So I suppose to your question about how often do you check in, for us, as I said previously, it's it's almost daily, to not constantly iterate. Yeah, but just to make sure that we're troubleshooting or bulletproofing results as best possible. And it really isn't time consuming. As I said, it can just be an open communication channel on Teams, or regular check-ins with sales and marketing, just to ensure the most important thing, to ensure that the client's investment is protected.
Nice. And in terms of like a specific, I know this is what every marketer is struggling with at the moment, but like a specific metric, do you for your ABM programs on that to determine whether it's working or not? Do you have a quantitative kind of metric that you use?
Yeah, it really depends. It really depends on the program type. So not every program that we run at Clarify is sales and marketing. We just have clients that work with us in a sales capacity. We just have clients that work with us in a marketing capacity. So just as long as you're setting the KPIs at the very early part of any form of engagement, to make sure that what good looks like to the person that you're selling into and to the person that are subsequently investing their budget into you. Whether or not it really depends on what the objectives are, be it for brand awareness, be it for demand gen, for lead gen, for ABM, for deal-based marketing. All of those metrics are going to be different, and those numbers are going to mean something to the respective stakeholder that we're working with. So of course we deal in traditional marketing metrics when it matters, but actually what we do for our integrated programs is we're able to commit to pipeline, and we run a forecast model prior to any engagement based off the average order value of the client, sales cycles, etc., and how many opportunities we can unlock with the resource that we can put into the campaign based on their budget. So a campaign may carry one SDR head as well as our marketing expertise to create assets. Another may carry two SDR heads, which would be more money, but would equal more opportunities. So we really, I suppose, tailor our outcomes based on the type of metrics that mean the most to the client. And more often than not, and what we're finding a shift in terms of our client behavior is that, as I mentioned sort of earlier, proving marketing's value in the revenue chain, sort of for me is one of the most important things to do as a marketing person. And if we can do that with programs that carry pipeline as an end result and opportunities, then that's ultimately what we want to be championing as a business.
Problem 6 that came in, nearly there. ABM or demand gen takes so long. So I think this is probably more speaking from a demand gen point of view, but like ABM as well, it overspills. Do you experience this? Have you noticed this? We mentioned it earlier about the multiple touch points, but is there any way you've kind of accelerated or streamlined? You can take it whatever way you want, either the setup of campaigns or also getting to kind of like the outcomes and the results of the campaigns.
I mean, if it was easy, we'd all be doing it, right? But yeah, I'd say ABM and demand gen, they can be viewed as longer processes, but when the stakes are higher, it really it means that there's more often than not going to be a broader mix of skills and tactics deployed to see notable returns. So it's really worth having visibility of the sales cycle, I'd say, from the off, so that we can plan the prospect journey carefully. Also, we want to avoid, as I said earlier, bombardment at all costs, which means some programs take more time than others. Something I've noticed across our ABM campaigns is the involvement of sales as part of the broader influencing strategy that's becoming a bit of a trigger for us. So it seems quite obvious to say, but conversational intelligence, and what I mean by that is, sales is just another channel of outreach, be it the phone or LinkedIn or email, whatever that looks like. That conversational intelligence piece, it's a big part of knowing if our one-to-one approaches are landing. So, for example, when we moved on to asset creation, in the example that I gave earlier of the program that is carrying quite a bit more pipeline than we projected, is that some of our prospects, they don't scan or interact with the digital markers in the assets that we produce. So as sales, as part of our working to support them and enable them on the messaging, briefed obviously to reference the outreach in a very specific way, we found more often than not that the assets were landing. And that they'd received them and that they were intrigued by them and that they were more open to having a conversation. As we took time to understand them, their organization, it's simple things like that that can help marketing, sort of as I said, to really prove their value in the revenue chain and ultimately to contribute to programs that are going to carry pipeline and ultimately revenue.
Emily, last question. Congratulations, we've made it. But the final problem 7, is multi-stakeholder engagement. So again, we've got longer sales cycles. Part of it is because there are more stakeholders involved in every decision. How do you manage or approach this with kind of running up multiple stakeholders at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, you called it earlier, Sam. I think with Gartner, they're noting about 19 stakeholders, and we're seeing a very similar thing, and your colleague earlier seeing a very similar thing. So I think with more complex deals comes a more complex landscape. And for example, with deal-based marketing and pursuing high value bids, like when you tip the 300 million mark of certain deals, you can be dealing with as many as 80 to 100 stakeholders who are invested in your work and in you as an agency. So I think regardless of project size, we always ensure account management responsibilities are clear from the off. So our internal kickoffs, which are actually, I'd probably say the second thing that we do. I'll talk about the first thing that we do in a little bit. But we know who the stakeholders are involved in the campaign, and who do we, i.e. you, have at your organisation who's best positioned to contribute to the influencing strategy. And that step prior that I talked about, it's always drafting the team structure when you are engaging with prospects or with clients, tentatively allocating the account champions as part of the proposal stage, which of course then relates to budget, because nobody wants to get into a situation whereby a project is underperforming or underinformed because the stakeholder landscape, it has been overlooked. So process-wise, I'd say it's about being fully aligned to what makes your stakeholders tick, and having a defined purpose to every single activity marked as part of the outreach and the influencing strategy. So maybe just ask yourself as a team, is what we're doing joined up? Is what we're doing relevant? Is what we're doing resonant? And are our feet firmly in the shoes of both the client and the organizations and the individuals we're attempting to engage? So then you can become as creative with your go-to-market as the budget dictates, knowing that you're well prepared as a unified sales and marketing team to navigate whatever the complexities are of the buying decision and however they play out.
What you said about the bigger deals, so say 300 million, 80 stakeholders on, I think at that point, I don't want the stress of managing that campaign. I think, keep the money. But it sure is tough. Emily, that's it. Thanks so much for joining. In terms of prizes, everyone gets a prize. At the moment, what we're doing is sending out space goods. I'm not sure if you've had that before, but it's like a coffee-based alternative. It's really, really good. But I will send that across to you. The final thing I will ask is, do you have a question or a topic that you would like us to answer or ask the next guest?
Maybe, and this was a question that I was asked the other day, if the sky's the limit in terms of budget, what activity would you recommend to a prospect or a client? What would be your best in class recommendation for a marketing campaign or an integrated sales and marketing campaign?
That is a fantastic and super, super fun question to answer. I think I might ask a few guests that one, but awesome. I will include it in the next interview. And yeah, thanks again for joining.
Thanks for having me.